Hey, what's going on? This is the Body Punch Podcast, and my name is Naz. Let's talk about MMA news. So, there were a bunch of topics that came out in the news. In the past couple of weeks, we've learned about so many new fights that have come up. We've learned about some deals that the UFC has done that are coming to fruition. There's just so much stuff in the world of MMA right now. And I just wanted to take this time, like I said, to discuss all of this news. So I have a list of topics here, and we'll just go through them one by one. And I'll let you know my thoughts about all of this stuff. So first off, one of the more important things that has happened in the UFC since the last time we talked is Brian Ortega versus Alexander Volkanovski is happening. Unfortunately, Alexander Volkanovski flew all the way to the United States, went to Vegas, and ended up catching COVID. So at that point, the fight was rescheduled. Brian Ortega was always the challenger. But now there's a caveat that's involved between these two fighters going at it. The UFC has announced that Brian Ortega and Alexander Volkanovski are both going to be the tough coaches. Now, there's a bunch of different interesting facts that go into this decision. First of all, a lot of people were talking about Jorge Masvidal and Kamaru Usman being the tough coaches. There was a lot of mention that they wanted 170 pounders in the tough TV show. So we know the answer to that. We've talked about it before. Masvidal and Kamaru Usman are going to be fighting sometime soon in front of a packed stadium. So we know that they're going to be fighting, and we kind of know the reason why. And I believe the reason is because the UFC needed someone to headline that packed show, first of all, that sold out in a couple minutes, by the way. And two people that can live up to the first show that the UFC is coming back to with fans involved. We needed a duo. We needed some people that would fight each other, that would, that would make sense as the first show for the UFC when coming back to this packed stadium. The card that Kamaru Usman and Masvidal they're on, I mean, that card is packed as well, and you can't have a fighter or two fighters on top of that card that don't make sense to be there. So that was the reason why this decision was made. And the speculations that were going into this on who's going to be the tough coaches, it was going crazy. At one point, it was almost confirmed that Masvidal and Kamaru Usman were going to be the coaches. But I guess that doesn't happen. And I think it's the right decision because you need some headlining fighters to be on top of that card that's coming up. Now, where does this leave us with Brian Ortega and Alexander Volkanovski? The tough part about this, no pun intended, is that they were supposed to fight already. This fight was already supposed to happen. And now they have to wait even longer to fight each other. Some people are speculating that this fight could happen in December, which is a very long time when you were getting ready for this fight just a little while ago. You have to fly all the way back, being Alexander Volkanovski. I bet you he has to be in the States for a little while. He's going to be outside of the training zone that he has in Australia. This is going to be a very weird situation for him. Now, the question that I want to ask on top of all of this is why these two? I think that not a lot of people want to do the TUF TV show. And not a lot of people are interested in what that show brings. Now, the UFC has a lot of nostalgia that goes into that show. They just want people to keep watching it because that was one of the main catalysts on why the UFC exploded the way it did. I mean, the fight that everybody talked about was Bonner versus Griffin was the TUF championship fight. So I think there's a lot of nostalgia factors that go into it. Right now during COVID, there are not that many ways to get new fighters involved. We see a lot of these cuts that are happening in the UFC, but we don't see a lot of new fighters joining the UFC. We've seen a couple here and there, and some really exciting prospects that have joined the UFC, but there's no real way, while all of these smaller shows are closed, to get new fighters involved in the UFC. Now, we do have that Dana White Looking for a Contender TV show, but while that's on its while it's off for a little bit, we have this TUF TV show. I think that's one of the reasons why. Another thing, like I mentioned before, not a lot of people want to join TUF anymore. They don't want to spend that much time involved in the production of the TV show. Just look at this fight as an example. These two fighters are out of competition for a little while now. Now, I don't know what the compensation is going to look like for this. Is it good enough to keep them afloat while they're not fighting? Because even though they could have all these small side businesses and all this kind of stuff, their main bread and butter for these two fighters is fighting. So I think the importance level as well, there could be some other fighters that want to get involved in the TUF TV show, but they're not at the highest level. Now, when I say people are not interested in joining the TUF TV show as coaches, it's because they've reached some astronomical level. Those people are not interested at all. The people that want to stay active are not interested. So you have these two who are willing to do it, and they're going to be fighting for a championship fight sometime soon. So, I mean, a lot of things aligned for this. Unfortunately, we couldn't see the Masvidal and Kamaru Usman as the coaches, but I say unfortunately, but I think this is actually a great thing for the UFC. They made a really good decision, and having those two headline the first card for the fans to come back to. So that's Brian Ortega and Alexander Volkanovski. Let's go on to the next topic. So looks like Dustin Poirier and Conor McGregor are going to have their third fight. All sources indicate that the fight is booked for July 10th. I mean, everybody's talking about it. At one point, people are saying that Dustin Poirier was the only one who signed the contract. Conor McGregor hadn't signed it, but he verbally agreed. But now we're at the point where it looks like it's all but done. July 10th is the date, and there's a bunch of questions going into this fight. Now, will Conor McGregor make the adjustments necessary to win this fight? Will Dustin Poirier, I mean, he's not the person that has to make that many adjustments. He won the fight, and it wasn't just by a brutal KO coming out of nowhere. It was a very technical win that Dustin Poirier had. But that's a lot of the questions about the actual fight. Now, some of the other questions that I have outside of the fight itself is this the right decision for Dustin Poirier? In my eyes and in many of the MMA media's minds, Dustin is the uncrowned champion. We're going to talk about this later, but Michael Chandler and Charles Oliveira are fighting for that belt that many people believe should be Dustin Poirier's. Is this the right decision? I think this is the perfect decision for Dustin Poirier. It's not like he's a contract fighter, right? So it's not like that money is going to change for him. He signs a couple fights and then he gets paid for that. Now, where it changes just a little bit is on the pay-per-view points. If he fights against Charles Oliveira or Michael Chandler, he's not going to get the same amount of pay-per-view points. He's not going to get a lot of that back-end money, the real money that a lot of these fighters are hoping for. With Conor McGregor, you're going to get that money. So I think that was the decision that Dustin Poirier made behind the scenes. He talked about how he's not interested in fighting Michael Chandler at all. And the reason that he gave for it was somewhat of I didn't really believe it as much, which was Michael Chandler needs to get a lot more fights before he can fight for the UFC belt. Now, we all know that Michael Chandler is coming from Bellator. He was the champion there. But Dustin Poirier still believed that he needed a couple more fights in the UFC before he could fight for that belt. Now, is that the real reason why Dustin Poirier doesn't want to fight Michael Chandler? I don't know. But I think that the decision to fight Conor McGregor instead of fighting for the belt is the correct one. You're not going to get many of these opportunities to have two fights with Conor McGregor back to back like this. Nate Diaz capitalized on it, and look how much success he's had outside and somewhat inside of the octagon. But I think that Dustin Poirier saw the decision that Nate Diaz made and really thought about it, because you can tell that he's thinking about everything that's involved in a Conor McGregor fight. Now, for Conor McGregor, a lot of people have talked about how this is the point in Conor McGregor's career where we're going to figure out if he's going to be a celebrity fighter that fights, you know, all of these YouTubers and celebrities and all that kind of stuff after his UFC career. Is he going to be able to keep up with UFC caliber fighters? I think this is correct. This is the point where we're going to find out where Conor McGregor stacks up in the UFC currently. Is he at that top level? Because Dustin Poirier is no joke. At this point, you can say to yourself that, hey, listen, Dustin Poirier is at the top. He is the uncrowned champion. And for Conor McGregor to lose to Dustin Poirier isn't as big of a deal as some people might think. Conor's lost to Khabib, who has beaten everybody. He's lost to Dustin Poirier now, who's beat a bunch of people. His resume speaks for itself. So this is the point where we see where Conor McGregor is at in his UFC career. I think this is the case because Dustin Poirier is the best of the best at this moment. This is what I believe. He's the uncrowned champion, like I've said so many times in this podcast alone. Because if he's able to beat Dustin Poirier, we know that he stacks up at the top of that division. So this is a real key point in Conor McGregor's career. I think we've said this a bunch of times too, that, hey, listen, this is the fight where we find out the real Conor McGregor. This is the fight. You know, we keep on repeating that line, but I really do believe, and maybe it's just me who wants to keep Conor McGregor, the hype train, going. But I think this is the real point where we see if Conor McGregor is ready and able to stay at the top of that 155-pound division. So let's move on to the next topic. Speaking of Conor McGregor's, one of his biggest rivals, Nate Diaz, has a fight with Leon Edwards. That fight is booked. The interesting part about that is it's the first 5-round co-main event in UFC history. Really big deal in my opinion because it shows the power that Nate Diaz has. What I mean by that, would this fight have been a 5-round co-main event if it was anybody else in that spot? Nate Diaz's spot? I don't think so. But is this the right game plan that the UFC is making in giving that amount of power to Nate Diaz? I mean, I'm always for the fighters getting the most. They're putting their body on the line. They're putting their mental health on the line. But this is showing Nate Diaz, and I'm just saying this as a comment, this is just showing Nate Diaz the amount of power that he holds. For him to, first of all, get the 2 fights, or get the fights with Nate Diaz, Conor McGregor, to get the BMF championship belt made for him and Jorge Masvidal, and now had the first co-main event 5-round fight in UFC history. This shows the power that Nate Diaz already has and the power that he keeps on gaining. So this is just something that we have to keep in mind. This wouldn't have happened without Nate Diaz being involved. Now, for Leon Edwards, I think this is a great situation for him. He really wanted to get out of that Belal Muhammad fight. He believes that he was the one, winning that fight before that unfortunate eye poke. I mean, Belal Muhammad, you can't really say that Belal Muhammad couldn't have won that fight. It's just the nature of the sport that we're in. This is not like basketball, where if you're down a number of points and the time is not permitting it, you can't come back. Like, we have this thing in our sport where you can get a submission out of nowhere. You can get a knockout out of nowhere. Something can happen, So you can't say that Belal Muhammad was losing that fight or lost that fight. He might have been losing the fight, but he didn't lose it, if you get what I mean. The unfortunate eye poke caused the fight to be over. And I think that Leon Edwards, his mentality going into it, thinking that he was winning the fight and would have won it if it kept on going, that mentality shows me that this is the right move for him and his team. When they look at it, they got one of the biggest stars in the UFC to fight against. Now, the big thing about Leon Edwards for a very long time was he was put on the shelf for quite a bit. Now, we all know the story behind that, visa, traveling issues due to COVID, having COVID himself, a bunch of issues that kept on popping up for Leon Edwards. Unfortunately, other fighters were dropping out as well. But one of the main things about Leon Edwards was the fact that not many people in the mainstream knew about him, knew about the capabilities that he has, being in the know of how great of a fighter Leon Edwards is. And this Nate Diaz fight will really show the mass casual fans how great Leon Edwards is, win or lose, because he's going to put up a great fight. We know that. But for him to fight Nate Diaz is such a big deal because everybody knows who Nate Diaz is because of the Conor McGregor fights, because of all the BMF and all the antics that he has. A lot of people know who Nate Diaz is, and it's going to shine a light on Leon Edwards. No matter who wins this fight, it's going to be great for the UFC. A lot of people complaining about the fact that Nate Diaz is coming out of nowhere and just swooping in. I mean, this is a massive fight. This is one of the fights that we want to see. Nobody, it was a surprise at the end of the day. Nobody was, oh my God, we want to see Leon Edwards versus Nate Diaz. But if you do the math here and you see what Nate Diaz was talking about, he was saying, hey, listen, I want to fight. I think he was saying top 5, maybe top 10 fighter in the 170-pound division, and you got your hands full with Leon Edwards. The other thing that I think is great about this fight is the fact that Nate Diaz is somewhat coming out of Conor McGregor's shadow. Now, he was never in the shadow, but what I mean by that is Conor McGregor is going out doing all these things. He fought Khabib, he fought Dustin. Everybody thinks that Conor McGregor's next fight is against Nate Diaz. Nate Diaz was kind of slow. He fought for the BMF championship, like I mentioned, and he fought Pettis, I believe. But those are all things outside of the Conor McGregor fight. And what I'm trying to say is Nate Diaz is showing us that he's not just the fighter that pops in whenever Conor McGregor needs a fight. That's not the case. And we've been waiting for that third fight for a pretty long time now. So I think it's just great that Nate Diaz is coming out. He's doing his own thing. He's staying relevant as always. And if he gets this win, oh my God, he's getting shot out of a cannon to the top of that division. So we'll keep an eye on that. So next thing I wanted to talk about, and we mentioned this before at the beginning of the podcast, is Michael Chandler and Charles Oliveira are booked to fight for that 155-pound belt. This is a big deal because myself and a lot of people, like I just said before, believe that Dustin Poirier is the rightful uncrowned champion for that 155-pound belt. But this is a big deal because the UFC is kind of giving the reins to Michael Chandler. Myself and a bunch of people thought that Michael Chandler might have to do a lot more to get a shot at that belt. And the reason because is this guy's coming from another organization. Even though he's one of my favorite fighters, it's just having that stigma behind you kind of puts an X on your back. Like look at Ben Askren, for example, coming from another organization. The UFC threw everything at him. They literally threw everything at him. Robbie Lawler, Damian Maia, Masvidal, and they really wanted to test him. So I thought this would be the same case for Michael Chandler, but he did get an amazing win against Dan Hooker. So that kind of leapfrogs him a bit. But what an opportunity for Michael Chandler. He mentioned this in one of his interviews with Brett Okamoto. He said, this is a life-changing event for me. This is a life-changing fight for Michael Chandler. So, and then we look at it from Charles Oliveira's perspective, the run that this guy's been on, and how appropriate is it that he's getting this fight? He's getting this fight against a guy that's had only one fight in the UFC, and he's been on this amazing run, beating Tony Ferguson, Kevin Lee, and all these fighters. How funny is that? But I think this is best case kind of scenario for now because Dustin Poirier, like I said before, he's making the right decision to fight Conor McGregor again. So we'll see how this fight plays out. I think this is going to be a fun fight. Great opportunity for both of these fighters. And the best part is that we know who's going to be fighting for that belt after. It's whoever wins that Conor McGregor-Dustin Poirier fight, unless something crazy happens. I don't want to jinx it, but a lot of crazy stuff has happened. I keep on thinking about that Petr Yan and Aljamain Sterling fight. We lined a bunch of stuff up after that fight. We thought, okay, like maybe TJ Dillashaw will be in the mix. Maybe, whoever. will be in the mix, and then something crazy like the Piotr and Aljamain Sterling fight, the ending of that happened. So let's move on to the next topic. This is a combination of two things that have come out. We talked about this before in previous podcasts, but Venum has released the fighter kits, the new fighter kits that have come out. I took a look at a couple of them quickly, had a sneak peek at them. When I look at them, is there really that much difference between that and the Reebok kit? I was expecting something crazy to come out. I thought that this new Venum deal would open the door for some amazing designs, and we haven't seen the walkout t-shirts. I'm expecting that they have those walkout t-shirts with the great designs and working with the great designers, but the actual kit itself, the walkout uniform, the t-shirt, the shorts and all that kind of stuff really looks similar to the Reebok kit. So it doesn't look like there was much in terms of change when it came to that. If I look at it, it was just some placement of text was a little bit different. Not much when it comes to being a little bit different than the Reebok kit. Now, I just want to bring up this point. Also, it's like they're so similar that if you just slapped a Reebok logo instead of that Venum logo, I would expect that it was a Reebok kit. Now, this is just what I've seen so far from the promotional stuff. There might be some extra stuff that they could bring in and really change it up. Let's hope for that. But from what I've seen, very similar to the Reebok stuff. Now, let's talk about the actual pay structure itself that Venum is introducing. I quickly looked at this as well and then started researching about it. Looks like the pay structure is very similar to the Reebok style. There was only a couple $1,000 difference, but some people have said even with the price of inflation and all this kind of stuff, still doesn't add up properly to the Reebok deal. The Reebok deal was coming in and those guys were promising that they would be making the same amount of money if they had sponsorship. People like Brendan Schaub have come out and talked about, and that was one of the reasons why he left the UFC and had his almost early retirement. But it was because of the pay that was taken away from him when UFC fighters weren't allowed sponsorships. I think that I think that this is something that they got to really work out. Maybe it could be like there would be one spot on your shorts that can have an approved sponsor. Obviously, all of them should be approved and all that kind of stuff, but maybe there's one spot that they can make a little bit of extra money. I don't know. But what I'm seeing here when it comes to the actual pay itself, I mean, it is kind of extra money that's given to them on top of the actual pay that they get. So I see a little bit from the UFC perspective, but at the end of the day, we just got to figure out a way to get these fighters paid a little bit more. Now, I get it for the fighters that when you look at the pay structure, I get it for the fighters that have only had a couple fights. But still, once you get to that UFC level, they don't really take it easy on you. So, and once you get to the UFC, we've seen it with a couple of fighters before. They throw the best of the best at you. So at that point, maybe you should be making a little bit more money. So I don't know. And again, with this Venum deal, some fighters might have expected something different when it comes to the actual payment itself. So they kind of hedge their bets before making the decision to go to either Bellator or one of these other places. I think that's one of the things that we got to look into as well, is how does this impact future decisions because of this Venum deal. So we've seen in the past some fighters have gone on to other organizations because they can get sponsors. And now that the fighters these days know what the Venum deal is going to involve, maybe this affects the decision when their contract comes to be re-upped. I don't know, but I think this is something that we got to think about as well. So that was all the topics I wanted to talk about for this week in the MMA news. Thank you for listening to the podcast. I really appreciate it. If you could like, subscribe, hit the bell notification, all the good stuff on YouTube. Let me know your thoughts about this MMA news in the comment section. Really love reading what you guys have to say. And if you're listening to this on the different podcast platforms, that's amazing. Thank you very much. Give 5 stars, all that good stuff. Give comments on iTunes. That'd be amazing. And thanks again. This has been the Body Punch Podcast. My name is Naz. Bye.